Now. Okay, so welcome to Sex and Disability with Sins Invalid. First, we want to thank our interpreter, Rain Dipoucat. I'm sorry, Rain, that I didn't ask that before now. And also Chanel Gallant, who is an activist who has been working at the intersections of sexuality, sex work, and social justice for 2 decades as an organizer, writer, political strategist, trainer, fundraiser, and speaker. Her writing has appeared in dozens of publications, including Pleasure Activism and Beyond Survival, Stories and Strategies from the Transformative Justice Movement. So welcome, Chanel, and I'm gonna drop that in the chat. And we're here today to talk about sex and disability for sure, but also to celebrate Chanel's recent piece in Extra, which is going to be part of a series called Pleasure and Protest, and the first installment of that is called Let's Celebrate Our Vulnerable and Perfect Bodies. So here we go for that. And Sins Invalid is here today on we're in the middle of our Sustainer Drive. If you love the work that Sins does, then help us keep it going. Sins Invalid has been around for 15 years. That's a very long time, even though it may not seem like it. And, in order for us to keep going, we need our community to sustain us. So please do consider making a one-time donation or becoming a regular sustainer. All right, so that's that's my whole song and dance there. I'm gonna put that in the chat as well. Oh, good, I did. And now we're gonna get started. Chanel, is there anything, I guess I didn't introduce myself. Hello, my name is Saray Jarrell Johnson. I am the social media and community engagement specialist here at Sins Invalid. I am a writer, and my book Slingshot won the Lambda Literary Award in Gay Poetry last year. So that's me. I'm also very happy to be here. I'm the newest member of Sins, and I'm happy to be here today with Chanel, of whom I am a longtime fan.
Hey everyone. First of all, I just want to say it goes both ways. I am a longtime fan of you, Saray. And in fact, I remember the first time I met you. I was just thinking about it at dinner tonight. It was actually at FemCon.
Yes, it was.
Yeah. It was that disastrous FemCon.
The last FemCon ever.
It was.
Final FemCon.
It was. Yeah. I'm not going to go into it, but yeah, that was I was an immediate fan. I also really appreciate that you're wearing your pearls, so that in case some pearls need to be clutched, they can be. Yeah. And I'm just a huge fan of Sins. I first, so I'm writing this 6-part series called Protest and Pleasure for Extra Magazine, because I wanted to, after working in the area, like you said, of sex and social justice for a couple of decades, I really wanted to redefine a radical sexual politic. Because I come out of like late 90s queer sex radical culture that was really, really not radical at all. Because it didn't connect sexual liberation to any other movements for liberation. And so, sex, as I came to understand, it was never actually going to get free until we took on things like capitalism, we took on white supremacy, we took on all forms of oppression. And so with this series, I challenged myself, like, okay, I'm going to try to make a case that like all of these movements for social, racial, and economic justice actually are we need them to win if we're going to free our sexualities. And try to do that in like this accessible way. And I really wanted to talk with Sins, and I really want to talk about disability justice, because I see disability justice as so inherently intersectional, and Sins specifically as so having such an incredibly beautiful, rich, powerful, nuanced, and gorgeous relationship to sexuality. Where do you see that?
Yeah, we did Sex and Disability Week on Instagram this week, where we took things from the Sins archive to someone just asked a question that says, are folks who aren't speaking meant to have cameras off? It would be helpful if you kept your camera off, because it just sometimes makes the video and audio for the speakers speed up. But it's your choice. There's nothing anything that's going wrong right now. Yes, so we did Sex and Disability Week.
Hi, Mom.
Hi.
Folks, you need to mute.
I'm just
a reminder to mute.
Lecture. Do you mind if I call you after?
I'm gonna mute all the participants.
Oh, great.
Well,
There we go. Everyone is muted, but you are also now muted, Chanel. Okay, great.
Okay, I just unmuted myself. Not that I don't want to hear people like inviting their mom into this conversation, but it's just gonna be a little hard to follow.
Yeah, for sure. And again, we do have ASL interpreters, and so they might not know what sounds are coming from us, or sounds that are coming from you. So let's make it easier on our interpreters by keeping ourselves muted. Anyways, yes, so we did Sex and Disability Week to promote this event. And so I was able to go through Sin's considerable archive of sexuality content, and it's graphic, and we got a couple of concerned citizens who felt like there should be less sex on Sins Invalid, to which I was told when I went to respond that is actually where one of the places where Sins got started. So, ableism does desexualize disabled people while simultaneously making us incredibly vulnerable. And I think that in that way, it does draw a parallel to a lot of other marginalized identities that mingle societal feelings of disgust along with people feeling like they should have total access to your body at all times, right? And additionally, I think that this is also true of several marginalizations that I experienced myself, but like many marginalizations where there's an assumption that like no one wants to have sex with disabled people, which is incorrect, right? People do want to have sex with disabled people. They just do not want people to know that they have sex with disabled people. And so there's a stigma that's attached to that desire masquerading as a lack of desire, which is always a place of danger. So I'm glad that we're having this conversation today, because it's dangerous. These presumptions are dangerous, and not just in terms of the violence that they definitely do invite and permit, but also for disabled people ourselves who do not get sex education that is good. Or even if you get sexual education at all. So, and also it's never, many of us were not born disabled. We became disabled over the course of our lives. And because of that, it's like, no, you don't get that like secondary education, right? Like if you become disabled well into your sexual life, or, you don't necessarily get like an updated sexual education for what your sex life should look like now. And so that can be very disempowering, and also confusing, big changes in ability can be traumatic, and also can compound other traumatic things that are going on at the time of diagnosis or at the time of a traumatic event. So.
Yeah, man, I already have, this is so exciting. This is exactly why I was so excited to have this conversation. Just like everything you said there, I was like, yes. And, when you're talking about the desexualization, it made me think about, and before when we talked about how there's a public desexualization, but actually a private fetishization. Mm-hmm. And it's not healthy or safe or respectful. And I think one of the ways you can see that is actually the rates of sexual abuse against disabled people are phenomenally high. And people are very surprised, in particular, the rates of abuse. I was really shocked when I found out the rates of sexual abuse against deaf and disabled boys. And it's like over 50% of deaf boys. Yeah. experienced some form of childhood sexual abuse. And so the whole narrative we have around gender and sexual abuse is incomplete, but also the whole narrative we have around the desexualization of disabled people, that's what you're missing something there. That's not that, there's something else going on there, that actually there's this very malignant sexualization that is not respectful of the agency of disabled people, which I think is a more accurate way of understanding that. And how dangerous and harmful that is. I mean, it's just so, it's so intense the way that disabled and deaf kids are abandoned to that kind of abuse, because we don't even have, there's like, what's the prevention for that? Which is why in my second column of Protest and Pleasure, I talk about defunding the police and abolition as necessary for creating safety, for developing actual systems to prevent sexual harm, which we don't have right now, right? And the other thing I thought of picking up on that too was around sex ed. So yeah, people get their sex ed and then it tops out, but we take it as normal that like everybody's body is going to change. Everybody will change. And it's like a deep truism of life. All bodies will change and most bodies will become disabled. If you live long enough to become old, you will become disabled. And so our sex ed, even if it didn't teach us about disability, could teach us a principle of bodies changing, that it's normal, like how to roll with things. Like we don't know how your body's going to change, but here's some ways that we can learn how to accept our bodies changing and support others in their bodies changing. Just that. Even if it wasn't like, hey, you might get lupus, or you might get like a hearing disability, or you might lose mobility. Even if it was just that principle of it's normal for bodies' needs and minds' needs to change, and for them to change every time you have sex. Think about how that would change our consent education.
Absolutely. And I think that, I have developmental disability that was diagnosed in childhood. I'm on autism spectrum. My initial diagnosis was Asperger's, which I know for many very good reasons is no longer used, but that was my original diagnosis. And I mentioned that only because it was so rare for female assigned folks who were Black and poor in the 90s to be diagnosed. And the criterias were very different at the time. And also I have systemic lupus, erythematosus, and mental illnesses. But I think that a lot of sex and disability conversations that I saw, when I was doing sexual health education as a trainer in college, were geared towards physical disability, which I very much needed because I had a physical disability. But when I think about the disabilities that I have seen in my community and also myself that affect sexual health and pleasure the most, it's mental illness, right? Like SSRIs frequently have the inability to orgasm as a common side effect, right? And lots of people experience mental health conditions that are dependent on SSRIs, right? So I think that some of it too is the kind of thing that people take for granted is just going to happen, that people will be on SSRIs, and that orgasm may or may not be able to be negotiated, right? But at the same time, it's something that's still associated with dysfunction instead of like a wide swath of our society.
Yes.
And so it's still like individualized and atomized in this way that it couldn't be more inaccurate, because so many medications, and not just like SSRIs, right? Blood pressure medication may have that as a side effect, many other medications, and just aging, right? Like I think about, it's always a touchy subject. Some of my work, because I love controversy. What can I say? I am messy. I'm from Jersey. Drama is a part of my life. But, I spend a lot of my own work in disability justice is building bridges between trans communities and disabled communities around medicalization and calling for a coalition of marginalized bodies, right? But thinking about the way being on testosterone for even a half decade has changed my relationship to sexuality in my body. It's just it isn't all like it's better, right? And that's like the pressure, right? Like especially as someone who experiences dysphoria, to be like, it made everything better and now life is good and nothing is bad or complicated, right? But I think that across the board, things that I have done to improve my mental health, have definitely affected my sexual function and sexual function of people that I know, but there's not a lot of space to discuss those things, right? And also we don't always, even beyond sex education, have a good system for even talking about how to approach these conversations, right? So there's assumption that they have to be inappropriate, or that there's no good place to have them, or they're only oversharing. And so it means that there's even less information being passed than when I first started having these conversations.
Wow.
And I wonder what it is culturally that's changed to make that so.
Oh, what do you think? What do you think it might be?
I think that the lesbian sex wars of the 80s and 90s never ended, but were only deepened by a very conservative, extremely turfy strain a belief that any conversation about sex is targeted at people who don't want to hear it. And there's no such thing as community sexual education that you might encounter in the wild. Of course, I am queer spawn. I was raised by lesbians. I guess, I don't even know if that's accurate, right? Like one of my parents was like an aggressive and the other one is a femme. So was I raised by lesbians? Neither of them are lesbian identified, but like that's the lane that they were in, right? That's the general milieu in which I was raised. So in the 90s, and like sex education was everywhere because we were in the middle of the height of AIDS, the AIDS epidemic. And so the way that younger generations think about sex education and where it should be is very foreign to me. Like even this conversation about kink at Pride, I'm just like, what do you mean? Like kink has always been at Pride. It's never
That is
happened.
not a conversation I'm gonna have. Like the conversation I want to have is like about how capitalism uses our desire as a tool to manipulate us into supporting those who have power. I am not having a conversation about kink at Pride. Y'all work it out. Like that's part of why I wanted to write this series. Like I'm just like, this sex shit is about really important stuff.
Right.
It's about really important stuff. It's about our freedom, but it's about all the structures of power in society. And I just got so sick, not only of seeing sex trivialized, totally trivialized, but I got so sick of the hypocrisy that privately, I knew what people were going through sexually. I knew about the trauma, the shame, the body image issues, and I knew how much of that was related to things like white supremacy that was creating these body images. I knew how much of it was patriarchy that was like shaming pleasure. I knew that it was like privately people were really struggling. And I knew that those private struggles, like all of our private struggles, come on, I'm a feminist, the personal is political. I knew that those private struggles were political. But then in public, everyone wanted us to talk about sex like it was just this like cute little fun diversion. How are we going to spice things up in bed? And I was like, I won't play your game. I'm not going to play this game. And that was for me, like I was a sex expert initially. I was a sex expert in my late 20s and my early 30s. And I was like, I'm not going to go along with the way that people want to depoliticize sex, trivialize it, turn it into nothing more than a commodity. I'm like, I actually had compassion for people's sexual struggles. And I understood and saw, I mean, I didn't understand it all, but I sensed that these struggles were related to much larger struggles. And that's how I ended up writing this, this series, Protest and Pleasure, on sexual liberation today, was to try to make that link between those struggles. I'm going to mute myself for a second, clear my throat, get some water.
Yeah, thank you for that, Chanel. I think that that's such an important point, right? I know that both of us have done sexuality activism, and I'm thinking about Section 230, I'm thinking about FOSTA SESTA, right? And then because I'm terminally online, I'm encountering, these increasingly not just sex negative, but conservative debates that I thought were long settled. Like I thought that they were really long. I mean, to the point where even like conversations from like the 70s sex wars have reemerged. Like I saw some real fighting about like sex toys the other day, and I was just like, is it 1974 already?
Remember in the fucking 90s when we had to live through all these debates about whether dildos were
That's
like
the one.
male?
It's back.
Shut up.
It's back.
No.
Yeah.
No.
It's
sorry. I'm so sorry for the people who have to engage in that debate, and I plan to float above it.
I cannot wait to have that kind of attitude towards things. Like I am still in a very reactive point in my life, but not to that. I was just like, that's corny. I'm gonna move on with my day.
It's so corny.
It's corny.
It's so corny. We have problems.
People live their lives.
We have so many problems. That's not it.
We do.
Isn't it?
We do. And Fossa Sesta,
problem.
I was one of the inaugural fellows for the Sex Worker Giving Circle at Third Wave.
Oh, right on.
Yeah. So, we got to give hundreds of thousands of dollars to sex worker-led organizations. And there's nothing I love more than one, touching money, large amounts of money, and then also giving it to sex workers. Love that. And so that was, it was great to work with other sex workers and former sex workers to redistribute those funds. But one thing that we noticed again and again is that like, Fossa Sesta has made sex work much more dangerous, right? Under the guise of helping people who are trafficked. And thinking about Fossa Sesta, is the thing that always strikes me about it is that it's a test run. Just like COVID was a test run to see how many disabled people America was willing to sacrifice to continue going to the club or like doing whatever. And also a lesson in thinking about how, honestly, as an autonomist, you know what I mean? Like, it's a hard time to be an autonomist because, we've spent all these years saying we keep each other safe just to not keep each other safe, right? So I don't really know what to do with that. But, Fossa Sesta is a test to see how much online freedom the government can restrict without people being upset and how much surveillance.
Yeah, and then what tool can we use to get this through the thin edge of the wedge? You want to say a little bit, just like briefly, what the Sex Worker Giving Circle is and what Fossa Sesta is?
Absolutely. I'll say what Fossa Sesta is. I do not know all the little letters of its horrible, horrible acronym, but Fossa Sesta was a law intended to stop trafficking, but really what it did was take Craigslist erotic services and Craigslist personals off of the internet, take places where sex workers, had more control over their client base offline, particularly Backpage. But it started, interestingly, because I would have never thought this, it started with Rent Boy, right? So it like, instead of like where I thought it would be, like Eros or Slixa or something like that, where, a lot of women sex workers, both trans and cis, make money in an upscale way. It actually was with like a mid-tier site for gay men to advertise for sex work. And with the Rent Boy raids, essentially what they said was that they were going to charge the people who owned these companies as pimps. And so because they were being charged as pimps, this did not actually happen. They were like, we're going to charge the big wigs as pimps, and charging pimps is always going to be a really charged issue because the definition of a pimp is so shadowy, right? It could be your roommate, it could be your partner, right? There's no clear way that the government or that the law defines what enabling sex work is. So that meant that they really had free reign to do whatever they wanted. Lots of people got kicked off of things that you wouldn't even imagine, like Twitter, like Tinder. Like I literally cannot be on Tinder ever again. People who were doing completely legal kinds of sex work got their bank account shut down. So things like that happened almost immediately. And so folks who were previously doing indoor sex work were many times, especially Black and Latinx and Indigenous people, were forced outdoors to do outdoor sex work, which makes them more subject to police violence and raids and also just abuse of all kinds. So that's the gist of Fossa Sesta. And then the Sex Worker Giving Circle is a fellowship for sex workers and former sex workers to decide how to distribute a big pot of money and raise more so we can give out an even bigger pot of money. And so it's in its third cycle. I'm not sure if the application is still open, but it does pay. So I do recommend it if you fit one of those two groups. And Section 230 is all of our worst nightmares. If you don't know about it, you should. It essentially wants to treat social media like a newspaper. And so they will be held responsible for the things that other people publish and print.
Yeah. One of the things that we had talked about coming into this conversation too was a bit about the relationship between, maybe let's segue from between sex, disability, and sex work. And there's actually a ton there. There's like a lot there, but you know, for folks who are on this call, like what do you, I mean, there's so much that we could cover, but what do you feel like is important for people to understand? What do you wish people understood about the relationship between disability and sex work?
That disabled people are not just consumers of sex work. I think that that's how mostly disabled people are positioned that way. But like for myself, you know, both as like a queer and trans person, but as a disabled person, like the people with lupus were very much discriminated against in the disability process, like the government disability process. It was very hard to get disability. In fact, the rules about how one gets, you know, SSI, SSDI had to change in order to better accommodate people with lupus, because lupus has a wide spectrum of disabling conditions within it, you know? And so it isn't so simple as to say like people with lupus should be eligible in these or not. So I think that for a great many people, and I wrote an article about this called—
You wrote a great article.
Thank you.
Drop it in chat.
Yeah, I will drop it in the chat. It's called Fossa Sesta is a Threat to Disabled Sex Workers. And I interviewed a bunch of disabled sex workers about Fossa Sesta, about why they do sex work. And
I thought it was such a great piece because I felt like when the conversation about discrimination against sex workers comes up, it's very rarely thought of as discrimination against disabled people. And then similarly, in the conversation about ableism, it's rarely thought of as discrimination against sex workers. And yet, in my experience, more than half, most sex workers have a disability. Like it's often not visible, but not always. You know, when you include, you know, psychiatric disabilities, mental health, substance use disorders, physical disabilities, like hecka disabled people are sex workers for the same reason everyone is a sex worker, which is that it is a economic safety net for people who don't fit in capitalism.
yes,
And who our governments aren't taking care of.
yes.
That's who sells sex.
Yeah, I mean, I worked with people who had cancer. I worked with someone with Down syndrome, you know, like it's just not, you know, and I think that a lot of it too is that the assumption that what a sex worker is a beautiful white woman, you know, like a beautiful young white woman who is beautiful and she's young, she has no children. You know,
man,
like
it's so wrong.
Absolutely.
It's so wrong.
The exact opposite of who's actually a sex worker.
Opposite.
And like that she looks like whatever is like what a sex worker looks like at the time.
Exactly, which is also what swings us back around to desirability.
Yes.
Because what sex workers, like, you know, like there's this idea that disabled people are not desirable, but actually what sex workers find out is that there's a very wide range of desire.
Yes.
People desire a very wide range of physical presentations.
Yes.
But you're never allowed to see that publicly. And so actually most people don't even find out how hot they are because their only indicator is media. And the media says, no, man, just that skinny white woman is hot. That's it. And then they're like built white cis dude. That's it. And then you look, and then people become sex workers and they start to meet other sex workers and they're like, oh, you make money? Yeah, because actually people desire all kinds of embodiments. They're just not allowed to in public.
Yes. And the gag is, you know, I think that even more than that, like talking men out of their money or like whoever you might work for, but like particularly cis men, it's just not it's a personality. It's a personality. You can be as beautiful as you want to be, but if you can't speak to men in a way that makes them give you money, you will not be. Like, I know plenty of beautiful people who thought because they were beautiful, they were going to make a lot of money during sex.
Yes.
It's not true, you know, like, it's not true. So, you know, like, if you can talk someone out of a necklace, if you could talk to somebody for hours, a lot of people want validation. Like, they want appreciation, validation, and anyone can, like, you know, if you can do that, it matters a lot less what you look like, because, but about the desirability, I do think that, you know, I'm always someone advocating for a coalition of marginalized bodies. I think that, like, politically, like, if fat people, disabled people, and trans people united against medicalization as we know it, we would be unstoppable. That would compose most of the United States. And like, even if we were able to just like have the most political part of like those groups, like, I just wonder what would come out of that coalitional politics. I know that disabled people and fat people often organize together, especially on the West Coast. But I think that, like, notably trans people are the outlier here, right? Like, I think that as a trans person, I see a lot of white, but not just white, trans people say things like, all transition surgery should be covered. Yes, they should. And it's incredibly wrongheaded to stop there, right? Like, if that's like your primary focus, then you've already missed the conversation. You need to do some education, because, like, universal healthcare, like, okay, so if you feel like, okay, all of my, my gender is completely aligned now, surgically, hormonally, everything, and then cancer. So what do we do now? What now, beloved? What do we do? Like being trans is not the only medical issue that trans people have. And so whenever I hear especially able-bodied trans people, who are like, coverage for all surgeries now, just the trans ones. It's just like, wow, like, you have to hate disabled people pretty deeply to stop there, like, you have to really live in a cave, like a cool cave, for that to be where you stop, because coalitional power is what we need. Like, I know that when we were doing our little Zoom rehearsal, and thank you for coming to that, because I know that the Zoom rehearsals are actually really whack, but sometimes you just have to see what's going to happen. I was a sex educator at Covenant House and Renaissance House in Newark as a college student. And some of the most work that I had to do, was around jelly rubber, right? Around folks who were using like jelly rubber dicks, and like the myriad allergic reactions that people were having to that substance, and how pushed it was on me as a young Black gay person, to use that, as many other kinds of prosthetics were much more expensive. So dysphoric people were put in a bad position where you're using this thing that's like incredibly harmful for your body, but also the conditions of those spaces are also disabling in themselves, because you were not allowed to give out condoms inside of those institutions, right? Like, I would have to meet people around the corner, down the street, to give them condoms or to give them lube. And so all of the marginalizations that we experience are designed to be disabling, which is why sexual health and sexual education across a lifetime, particularly in the community, are so important to me.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. I feel like there's some real pull quotes from what you just said too, that I like want to be on a social media slide tomorrow about coalitional politics, and how if the disabled people and the fat people and trans people all came together, you'd be unstoppable. Please do that. That sounds, I'm into that. I'm behind that. And when you were saying about, all trans surgeries be covered. Yeah, I hadn't really thought about it that way, that like what that leaves out. But what it immediately reminded me of the people who are like, free all the political prisoners.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, well, I'm not comfortable with that. Because no, free them all. Like, so the person who's in there for doing 20 years for selling weed is okay? Like, no, not,
right.
no. Mm-mm. So yeah, it just sort of reminded me of that, of the respectability politics or something. Yeah, that can really hold back the fullness and then the power of the coalitions, and I think to me, that's the point. Like, it's not that we're trying to be perfect about it. It's that we're trying to build unstoppable movements. And I think what I want to do in this series, Protest and Pleasure, which is 6 columns, was I wanted to be like, imagine what we could do for our sexual liberation. And I was just kind of like choosing sexual liberation because I care about it, but also because I was like, let me try and get some more of the gays on board with why all of these movements matter is because of that. I was envisioning like what would happen if people saw themselves invested in every liberation movement, if they understood their own mutual interests in every liberation movement, if they understood my life is materially harmed by the oppression of folks who I don't share experiences with. But they are, and that's what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to draw these links that aren't usually made, which is like, hey, you're impacted by migrant justice, whether or not you are a migrant. You are impacted by ableism, whether or not you currently have a disability, and also you probably do. Or like, name the 3 closest people to you. There, someone has a disability. But that all of that I wanted to try to make really concrete what it means to say that no one gets free until we all get free. That all of our liberation are bound up together. And then when I was kind of envisioning it, I was like, okay, where does this come from? And then I was like, oh, I mean, Sylvia and Marsha were saying this in the 70s. Like, this is actually the roots of queer liberation, really queer and trans liberation, is an idea of collective liberation. And I went into I did some research and I found this like a statement, like a declaration, a manifesto that they wrote in 1970. And it's super fucking radical. And it's more like, it has more in common with the like Black Panther 10-point program than it does with marriage equality, for sure.
Yeah, naturally.
Yeah.
I think that maybe we should leave our conversation there and see if folks have any questions.
Yeah.
Since we're coming to the 15 minutes left point, I think that, stopping with Star House is, oh yeah.
A statement. You know what? I think I linked to it. Yes, it's linked. It's linked in the piece, in the article on disability justice.
Got it, dropping it in the chat.
Yeah, I quote from it where they're like, they say something about how liberation for all gays and poor people and homosexuals and Puerto Ricans and Indians and Black people, and fuck this government that can put a man on the moon but lets Americans starve. That I'm like doing a poor job of recapping it, but I gave the readers a taste of how transformative and revolutionary that vision was in that piece on disability and sex, the first column. And then the next column is going to be on defunding the police and abolition. And the third column is on migrant justice and border abolition. Ooh, you got it. And yeah, and there's a whole range of 6 of them that build up to a vision of collective liberation.
Wonderful.
And SE.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Chanel. We're taking a look to see if anyone has any questions, any comments, concerns. We also love concerns. Please do air your grievances in the chat as well.
Hi, my name is Amanda Shaw.
Hi, Amanda.
Hi, would you mind putting it in the chat just so our interpreters have?
I'm sorry, I can't type.
Okay.
So, because I have cerebral palsy, I just wanted to say that I want to lift up Chanel and what she's talking about because she's great. And that's all I wanted to say. Thanks for being here and talking today.
Thank you, Amanda.
Yep. So,
Amanda and I are comrades in showing up for racial justice.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, thank you for being here, Amanda.
Oh, I'm sorry I couldn't type it in the chat.
It's no problem. Our CART interpreter got it.
Okay.
So.
But this is a great conversation. And don't forget people with developmental and intellectual disabilities.
Thank you. Yeah, somebody mentioned that in the chat too. Actually, this very disturbing statistic about 85% of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities experiencing sexual abuse. which is really, really heavy to sit with. And I actually wish I'd given a little bit more space for that. Like I've had a little bit of time to process how intense and heavy that is. But, you know, when I first started reading about that, it was really painful. It was really painful to sit with the ubiquity of sexual violence against people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, physical disabilities. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm an autistic person, so I have a developmental disability. And when I was part of the Love with Accountability, ripping up childhood sexual abuse at the root.
Yes, I have that book.
Yay! Yeah, and I think that one thing that always strikes me about sexual abuse against autistics is that there's it's the disposability that makes it more possible for those things to happen, particularly to autistic children against whom there is a genocide. You know, like I don't know what else to call it. There's a genocide against autistic children. It is completely permissible to kill and harm autistic children to the point where, you know, it happens very frequently, and that people will, you know, write whole pieces empathizing with murderers to do so. I know, like, you know, to get back to activism, I remember, you know, I was in the movement for Black Lives, particularly I was a part of Black Lives Matter. I was a chapter lead for Black Lives Matter Philadelphia for a year. And I'm a founding member of Harriet Tubman Collective, and thus had contact with the movement for Black Lives. And it was really difficult. And while I am an abolitionist, or, you know, I believe in abolition, to watch people organize around a woman who to go to Harvard who had murdered her autistic child, and called her child a monster. And while I do believe in abolition, I think that, like, I don't know, you know, like I feel like there are plenty of mamas who don't kill their babies who we could be rallying behind first. And I think that especially because there is so much ableism, and so it's complicated, you know, it is really complicated for people with developmental disabilities. And I think that there is, particularly for those of us who are non-speaking, is particularly vulnerable for young people who are non-speaking, just because societally children are oppressed. They don't have as much power as adults. They are dependent on adults for their caretaking. And that does render them more vulnerable in those ways. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I think, you know, there's a comment in the chat around acknowledging the sexual identities and desires of people with disabilities, which I want to turn to in a moment, and talk about resources and that kind of stuff. And including kind of more like sex ed or sex and disability 101 resources, which I think there are actually a couple good books. There are some really good books out there. So yeah, I wanted to just kind of pivot to like, okay, let's talk about resources, strengths, desire, beauty. I think it's, and I also, you know, I want to say, I think it's important to have some space to be with and be present to the reality of genocide and murder. That's got to be part of our fight, you know, is that we have to create a way for us to be with that and with the grief around that. You know, that's just real. That's what it is. So, but yeah, do you want to suggest some suggestions, resources, people who are maybe earlier in this conversation? I don't know, kind of like, whoa, what's all this about?
Yeah, I think that one thing that SINS can do, we have your emails. Yeah, we have your emails through Eventbrite, which you signed up through. So I can send some resources on 101 to your emails later on this week. Cool. Since that's a question that does seem to have come up a lot. Something, yeah. Carly says, something that's really important to me to remember is that there is a lot about us being disabled that can make us really amazing sexual partners.
Let's talk about that. I would love to talk about that.
Yeah, the ways that we have needed to get to our bodies, our minds, plan for our needs, be flexible, etc.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a whole pity narrative, and we're just going to throw that out. This whole thing and that's why people think when it comes to sex work that disabled people are mostly consumers, not sex workers, because it's not in their mind to imagine that disabled people are so hot, powerful, competent, good hustlers, entrepreneurs, all that. And instead they're just like, oh yeah, the sex workers have sex with them because no one else will fuck them. That's not, that's not it. So, thank you. Someone put in the chat, right? A quick and easy guide to sex and disability. There's ones for kids. There's like younger people resources too for teens, I think. But do you want to say a little bit about like why sick and disabled sexual partners are better lovers?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think that one thing that comes to mind is, I wouldn't say that everyone is, but I think that if you're a disabled person who has gone out of their way to unlearn some of their internalized ableism, I think that there can be less of an emphasis on orgasm and more of an emphasis on pleasure. Although,
Yeah.
you know, orgasms are great. I'm not saying that disabled people don't want to have orgasms. That's not any kind of characterization that I want to make. But thinking about destabilizing the idea that there is a single way for a body to function, there's a single way to express pleasure, there's a single way to have good sex. It's just not as accessible for us. And something that we didn't get to this yet, which surprises me, but I thought, that we talked about during, our entry, session, is that a lot of the things that able-bodied people enjoy as a part of their like sexual repertoire were made for disabled people, right? Like accessibility devices. Like I look at a Liberator wedge and I'm like, the Liberator wedge that you get at the hospital that you use in PT, like they were obviously designed as assistive technology. Again, I am on Twitter a lot, and this chair with like a hole in it, like a stool, I should say, with a hole in it, was going around, and people were like, wow, like just leveled up the game. And it's like, this is literally the chair from the hospital, like this is a hospital chair with a hole in it. So many things that people think is like sexual enhancements, like start out as accessible technology. And like I even think about the Hitachi magic wand, like something that is like, thank God for it. First of all, Hitachi, you really put your foot in it. I feel like the only two places I would ever buy stock are in Hitachi and Tiger Balm, because that's what my life really looks like. Yes. And, you look at something that both relieves pain and like brings orgasms. It's just like, you definitely have disabled people think for this, especially with that like long handle. Like, I just feel like, yeah. Or even the fact that a Black disabled man invented the first silicone dildo, like those things are.
Show some respect.
Yeah, like
dildo.
We love assistive technology over here, and like sexual assistive technologies are some of the things that most often are things that able take for granted. Mm-hmm. Estelle says also, Adrienne says, because we're hot and creative. Yes, absolutely. Estelle says also many disabled people have had to be so purposeful about knowing and accepting our bodies and all their foibles, for sure. I think that can be a huge bonus for sexuality for both people. Completely agree. Yeah, completely agree. I think all of those things are absolutely true. I think that more accepting of like the normal things the body does, like age, or, need lube. That's one thing that we also talked about, like, like straight people are very like, like especially like young straight men and sometimes, heterosexual women can be like, lube, like why would I ever need lube? But those, folks who, have dry mouth as a symptom know that, like lots of people need lube, and as a gay, like, and also like lube, just like want lube, like instead of assigning a value judgment onto things that make things more pleasurable or easeful. I think that there can be a more utilitarian approach for disabled people in sex. Like we're just doing the best we can.
I feel like I could talk for hours about what I love about having sexual partners who are sick or disabled. And I had this moment years ago where I was like, wow, this is just so much better. I had a date who had EDS, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. Mm-hmm. And hi, yeah, a zebra on the call. And, the first thing was people with EDS are known for velvety skin. Right? It's one of the symptoms, is like this incredibly soft skin. How's that a problem? How's that a downside? And then her, like just taking care with her body meant that I had to be so much more present. Like I had to be so much more present because I couldn't just, I don't know, I couldn't just kind of leave the room for a moment. Do you know what I mean? Or I could hurt her. I had to really be in what I was doing. But the thing that I really loved too was that she had to be so much more present too, and so much more authentic. And I realized how much I thought it was so much hotter that nobody could just fake it. Nobody could just play a role. Like the sex we were going to have to make up on the spot. And it wasn't going to be what I just always felt sad when I was sleeping with someone, especially early on, where I sensed that they were just doing what they thought they were supposed to do. And that they were trying to cover their vulnerability and act cool. And I was like, that's not why I'm doing this. I'm not in this to perform. I'm in this because I want something kind of intense, probably a little bit scary, some risk to it, and something unknown to happen. And so when I realized that actually sick and disabled lovers really increased the authenticity because of that purposefulness, because of the presence, because of the knowingness about their own body. And it just required me to come into my own body much more and pay much closer attention. And it was great. I was like, and it's like, do you ever have sex where even just like, it's so hot that even just like getting close to each other feels kind of electric?
Yeah.
I felt like I got so much more of that from sex with sick and disabled people. I don't know if I can fully explain it any more than I have, but it was just like charged more in this way that I was like, yes. And in the opening scene of the piece that I wrote for Extra on disability justice, the Let's Celebrate Our Vulnerable and Perfect Bodies, it opens with a line from Patty Byrne, the founder of Sins Invalid, talking about having extremely hot sex without leaving her wheelchair. And that's kind of that's really resonated with my experience too, of introducing more of a understanding of disability. Was so much more can become rich with eroticism when you're not just trying to have like normal sex.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Chanel, for being here today. I think that has been this has just been so wonderful. And I will consider us making another event that's just on Sex and Disability 101. That's not what we had planned for today, but I think that if y'all say there's a need for it. So I'll go back to the drawing board and see how we can do that, autistically. Yes, autistically, but also artistically. Again, if you love the work that SINS does, if you have had a good time today, if you've learned something today, please do consider donating to SINS, become a sustainer, sign up for our newsletter, follow us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and keep in touch with us because we are here to continue making disability justice a reality. And to support disabled artists and activists, and to make events like this for all of you. So maybe you aren't able to donate this time. Please tell a friend to tell a friend. This recording will be available on Facebook as soon as it downloads to my computer. And it was a pleasure to have you here, Chanel. Thank you to the interpreters. Thank you to the CART interpreters. Thank you to all of you, and have a wonderful, wonderful evening.
Thanks, everyone. I so loved being here. I so appreciate this invitation, Saray, and to SINS generally. Please give to SINS, support SINS, and you can find the article that I'm referencing on my website, which is just chanelgallant.com on the list of publications. All right.
All right.
Take care,
Thank you so much.